Before you watch this video, please be warned that Needy Streamer Overload is a game that depicts mental health issues such as self-harm, depression, drug use, and suicide ideation. While ultimately the game is nuanced in its messaging, these depictions can be upsetting and triggering for certain audiences. In addition, there may be flashing lights in this video, so please be warned and close this video if necessary. Needy Streamer Overload is an interactive fiction developed by Japanese game developers Zimono and WSS Playground that critiques the impact of contemporary internet culture through its aesthetic, narrative, and mechanical choices. In the game, you play as P-chan, the producer for the main character Ame, through the duration of 30 days as she attempts to become a very famous streamer. Throughout the game, the player must interact with various tasks, represented on a desktop screen, to manage Ame's day-to-day life. In this video analysis, we will explore the ambiguous role of the player character, P-chan, and how their various roles in the game can serve to strengthen its two core ethical messages. The first on the detrimental impact of contemporary internet culture, and the second message highlighting issues of mental health. This video essay will be divided into 3 parts, looking at the 3 different roles and identities that P-chan, or you, the player, takes on in Needy Streamer Overload, and how each of these add layers of meaning to the narrative and message of the game. So the first of these identities is P-chan the caretaker. When you first enter the game, you are identified as P-chan and are given the role of being Ame's producer, picking out her daily schedule and managing her life through resource bars and basically what looks like Windows XP. This sets up convincing evidence that the P in P-chan basically just means producer-chan. To add on to this role, the game makes use of procedurality and simulation. What we are given is an early version of the Windows aesthetic. Basically, the OS or desktop interface is the UI of the game. It bears striking resemblance to Windows 2000 or Windows XP, and this can be quite the throwback for anybody used to the internet during the early 2000s. Many of the same affordances that can be found on a regular computer also show up on this interface because you can drag around windows with the bar on the top, you can close things with the X bar, you can expand them to be full screen by clicking on the big square in the top corner, and you can minimize tabs that are too annoying to you. These affordances convincingly set up the simulation that you are a producer across the screen who is modding Ame's chat from afar and also telling her what to do in the day using these icon applications on the desktop. These affordances and the simulation in general sets us up for parasocial relations with the idol across the screen. It simultaneously simulates and provides for that need while also actively deconstructing it. That was a very big sentence, so let me explain. We can understand this in 2 ways. The first is the parasocial relationship that the game fosters between the real-life player and Ame. As defined by Pierce and Rubin, parasocial interaction is a perceived interpersonal relationship on the part of a television viewer with a mass media persona. In recent years, this definition has expanded to include the study of interactions between media consumers and fictional characters because the original definition was written in 1989, before we had the internet. So don't worry, we're not applying it wrongly, just because it says television, yeah? But anyway, the player forms parasocial relations with Ame, or K-Angel, as we bond in a one-sided manner with this fictional character. We are also made to care for her through the game's prompts and system, balancing out these resource bars and making sure that she's happy and able to achieve her dreams of becoming a great streamer and paying the rent. This is an instance of what Bogos terms as procedural rhetoric, as we are made to go through and facilitate these processes from the role of the producer. Replying messages feels organic due to the familiar interface that bears many similarities with Line, WhatsApp, Telegram. In addition, choosing what Ame gets to do in the day makes us feel actively involved with her life and the consequences of any decision that is being made in the game. Harper draws similar comparisons using Bogos arguments to analyze Persona 3, arguing that the game's procedures, in terms of its genre conventions and rhetorical frames, allow it to more convincingly sell its message. This can be specifically seen through the game's social meter mechanic, which allows you to increase your characters' bonds with their friends. In turn, it also increases your combat ability, highlighting a message on the importance of friendship. These interactions are designed to draw out a sense of protectiveness from the player, as players actively try to minimize the stress and mental darkness stats in the game. On the second level, within the game's narrative, K-Angel is a famous streamer with fans who do form these parasocial relationships with her within the game world. This is interesting from a meta-commentary point of view because we are both within and without this storyline, suspended between relating to this character from the POV of the player, but also as presumably someone who watches the kind of content that K-Angel is making in the first place. These interactions effectively set up a sense of personal investment in terms of the player's relationships with Ame. We are happy when she succeeds, and sad when she does not. This can have the effect of actively persuading players about the harms of the internet, as we see Ame's mental darkness and stress go up by interacting with certain options on the internet. This also sets up for the dissonance that players would feel when they notice P-chan's second role in the game. As the game progresses, we come to realize that Ame is not really coping very well with her life circumstances. In the in-game messenger app, Ame would constantly rant about her hatred for life and herself. Through all this, P-chan is not really given the most ideal set of tools to deal with the situation. This is evidenced by the highly limited dialogue options that give you the choice to either be demeaning, apathetic, or oddly enthusiastic. Rarely do these options ever allow you to truly help Ame as a friend. We can understand this lack of options as a closed ethical system. As explained by Sakai, closed design limits ethical player agency, but focuses on creating strong ethical experience. Players cannot affect the world with their values, but they are affected by the game's design values. In Needy Streamer Overload, the first time a playthrough hits a high enough stress level, Ame will have a breakdown. The normally cute vaporwave background that shows you the time of the day is going to turn red, and Ame's webcam is going to show her clenching her hands over her face. None of the stickers you send her has any response. She then tells you to cut her, and a pop-up shows up on the screen, prompting the player to do as she says. At this point, there is no way to progress the game besides following through with what she wants you to do. And this is the point where most players would feel an inherent tension between themselves and the character that they are supposed to play, P-chan. This dissonance between the player intention and actions allowed in the game world can be seen by the instinctive attempts to find other ways to progress the game by Let's Player during their playthroughs of the game.
What'd I do?
Cutting some bread, guys. We're cutting some bread. We're gonna make sandwiches. What?
How do I exit this? How do I not do this?
In the game, we can thus assume that P-chan is not really a vessel to express player intention. Instead, P-chan is presented as an enabler to Ame, incapable of stopping her from spiraling when she needs help the most, and actively trying to harm her at points in the game. So, P-chan's identity is even more of a mystery now, because if P-chan is not us, then who is P-chan? From an ethical gameplay perspective, we can read this as the game forcing us to confront the discomfort of having to sit through someone precious to us going through a depressive episode. This could send the message that depressive episodes are bad, but the more likely message is that of a toxic relationship, where we find that P-chan is pushing Ame to do more and more things that she does not actually like or want, for the sake of achieving her toxic goal of becoming a big-name streamer. This becomes apparent through a close reading of the other aspects of the game's mechanics. The game is structured such that bars for stress and mental darkness are almost always high if you are pushing for more followers and following a more consistent streaming schedule, because of how the streak bonus works. On the other hand, it's also very easy to max out the affection stat, which would result in an overly attached girlfriend type of ending, indicating that she has a toxic over-reliance on P-chan. There's also some streaming content that is probably not appropriate for a kid that still looks like they are in high school, with the sexy streams and the ASMR streams. The fact that the abusive dialogue options are even available in the first place also serve as an indicator that P-chan is kind of a weirdo sadist who doesn't really care and is only pushing for Ame's increase in followers. We are thus forced to sit through and carry out these interactions by virtue of the game in the process of becoming P-chan the toxic enabler. Through these interactions, Needy Streamer Overload effectively shows us the harms of a toxic relationship. It also shows us the occupational hazards that streamers or online celebrities might face at the hands of toxic management companies, or simply from the pressure of negative comments that they are exposed to online. Last but not least, these ideas are reconciled in the final ending of the game. This ending is unlocked after a player has completed all other endings. In this final, or so-called true ending, Ame takes controls of P-chan, even chiding the player, stating, "There are a lot of ways we could potentially go with, but I realize this way is better. It's more correct." We are told that Ame was in control all along. In the end, Ame figures out that she does not need P-chan anymore, standing up and walking away from the webcam. This indicates that the entire game was basically Ame running simulations of her streaming career through the perspective of P-chan. This ending reframes the previous two identities of P-chan, proving that they can simultaneously exist, but also explaining discrepancies in P-chan's behavior. By understanding Ami and Pichan as one and the same, the game frames the behavior of Pichan as symptoms of Ami's mental state, unable to love herself, and all the while willing to push herself to unreasonable extremes. It also shows her isolation despite her desire for love and affection, as she goes as far to create a separate personality to provide for these needs. In this ending, however, she decides not to become a streamer. As such, the meta aspect of this game allows the game to comment on what it has come to represent, as the player is eventually left with an empty screen and no game to play. This denotes the game's message on how the system it simulates is ultimately not necessary, and that happiness is better found elsewhere. The fourth wall break here is particularly effective in conveying this message on the harms of the internet, because it finally helps us identify what Pichan is, and highlighting the significance of Pichan eventually being abandoned in its entirety. To wrap up, there are some critiques I have on how this message is conveyed. Firstly, much of the game's commentary only becomes apparent through the final or true ending, which reveals Pichan's true nature. However, most players would not get to this ending given how many runs it would take and how many hours it takes to go through each run. This makes the game's message a lot more inaccessible, despite how crucial this message is in subverting expectations or stereotypes on people like Ami. Without this ending, the game implies the conclusion that Sorry Chatty comes to in her everyi.it review, that Pichan is a sadistic outsider and the game encourages the player to basically torment this young girl for our entertainment. Another piece of criticism that I agree less with is IGN's Japan's critique on the portrayal of Ami as an unrealistic character, as she seems, quote-unquote, to be more of a male nerd's delusion than a realistic woman. This criticism fails to pick up on the nuances and pressures on young females that the game depicts. Ami's self-esteem problems are not particularly rare, as researchers like Killis et al. Have found. From the research, Killis et al. Have shown that there is a positive association between heavier social media use of more than 2 hours a day and internalizing problems such as anxiety and depression. As such, Ami is not such an unrealistic character, as her experience actually overlaps with a major mental health issue among her real-life demographic of young female. I'd like to conclude by talking about where this game stands in reality. I think this game's aesthetic ironically draws in the same audience it calls out: fans of otaku or idol culture or fellow internet overdosers. This game is basically telling us to touch grass. But seriously, on the surface level, Needy Streamer Overload looks like the kind of visual novel that otaku culture or people who are so-called weeaboos would like to play. I think this message is particularly important because it gives them a love-hate letter to those people who thrive on the internet. By breaking the illusion of immersion, it serves as a dark reminder that streaming is a performance and that living isolated on the internet can come with a lot of dark consequences, regardless of whether you are a viewer or a performer. Therefore, to all those who might currently be on an internet overdose, I hope you reach out, seek help, and give help, and be kind in this shared space.